Welcome back to Sunday Arvo Sermons with Pastor E. Today we're moving ahead to Mark chapter 4, and in particular a story that Mark describes. Again, it's very likely that this story was recounted to him by the Apostle Peter. It's verse 35 to 41 where Jesus calms the storm. I love the ocean. My wife Sandy loves the ocean too. That picture on the wall there of the big wave is just a way of Sandy, who really loves the water, remembering what the ocean looks like as we live out here in the most isolated inland city in Australia, that is Kalgoorlie. We're 4 hours from Esperance, the beautiful beaches of Esperance. That's our local beach. So my wife and I love the ocean. I'll bet you love the ocean too. However, I can tell you plenty of scary times at sea that I've experienced. And I want to pay tribute too to a couple of unknown heroes. Certainly I'm not sure who they were or who they are. But just recently, a very unfortunate man was attacked by a bull shark in the Swan River. And it was a nasty attack, but apparently 2 onlookers dived in and put their own lives at risk to save this man. Now, I can tell you that back when Sandy and I were first married, we were staying in a house, a lovely place in East Fremantle. And one of the activities we loved to do together was we'd get on our bikes and go for a ride down to the Melville foreshore, and on the way stop off at Blackwall Reach, which is, I believe, one of the deepest parts of the Swan River. And Blackwall Reach is basically, I think it's a limestone cliff on the side of the Swan River, and it was great fun to just jump off, dive off into the river and drop right down as deep as we could go and swim and splash around. That's exactly the spot where this bull shark attacked the man. And I think of the number of times Sandy and I swam around having a great time, oblivious to any possible danger. The thing we were most scared of was accidentally bumping into some of those big brown jellyfish that are completely harmless. So it kind of it was a sobering thought for Sandy and I, wondering if there was ever a time where one of these bull sharks might have sailed right past us as we were there having a great time down at Blackwall Reach. So the ocean can be a scary place, and not just the ocean, but any body of water that's large enough for us to drown in or to encounter any sort of trouble in. And believe it or not, the beautiful Sea of Galilee, and Sandy and I have had the privilege of seeing this wonderful place. It is lovely. The Sea of Galilee, because of the geography of that region, involving very sharp cliffs and mountains around the side of the sea, you've got the desert climate, the desert location that's not far off, and then you have Mount Hermon, which is always snow-capped. The cold winds can meet with the hot winds. Right there in the Sea of Galilee, you've got the mountain shafts, the mountain gaps, where a wind tunnel can be created. To cut a long story short, a storm can brew up there on the Sea of Galilee, causing massive waves in no time at all. And in fact, it's believed that, I believe that it's actually illegal in that region of Israel to go out in a small boat in the afternoon. Apparently the safer time is in the morning. So this is the kind of storm that Jesus and the apostles found themselves right in the middle of with very little warning. So we come into the story in Mark chapter 4. If you're wondering what's happened in Mark chapter 3, it's still there. I'm not going to be covering every single section of Mark's Gospel. We're going to be looking at key sections as we go. And this is certainly one in this story. Mark chapter 4, verse 35. I'll read that passage. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." So the title of my sermon today is "When the Waves Break Over Your Boat." What do you do and what will you do if it happens again? So I have a question. If you are a follower of Jesus, there are 5 ways that he will rock your boat. And what will you do about them? The first way that Jesus will rock your boat is that mission is close to his heart. What Mark is describing here is a mission trip. This was a mission trip directed by Jesus. In verse 35, you heard me read, "That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side.' Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him." What was on the other side? It was known as the Decapolis, and it was where there were 10 Greek cities in that area. That was obviously a very Jewish area around the Sea of Galilee, but these were Greek cities. So this was people who were different from the culture that the disciples knew of. And Jesus said, "We're going there." It was a mission trip. So mission is close to Jesus' heart, and that's why he will continue to stir you up. He'll stir me up. He'll stir us up to go over to the other side. Now, we need a balance in our Christian life, in our walk with Jesus. The balance is we spend time with him, just us alone, getting on the same page with God, renewing, refreshing, allowing him to refresh and renew us every day, getting to know him, not just know about him. Jesus himself set us that example so many times, even in this shorter Gospel of Mark. It tells of how Jesus went away to a lonely place, went away to the mountaintop, went away to pray. But the balance is that as we have that happening in our life, that quiet time with the Lord, spending time with him in his presence, he then sends us out. He wants to use us as his instruments. He'll send us over to the other side, to the next door neighbour, to the others, to those who are different from us, those who speak different language to us, those who have a different culture to us. The mission trip is on. So when the waves break over your boat, will you still fulfill your mission? This is the thing. Mission is tough. The devil doesn't want the good news to get out there. The devil doesn't want this treasure, this priceless treasure, to be shared with all of humanity. So he'll do whatever he can to thwart the mission happening. Jesus will also rock your boat because malicious hate will be coming your way if you are a follower of Jesus. You might think that's a bit of a strong term and concept to use, but I'm not exaggerating at all. There was a malicious source seeking to destroy Jesus. How do we know this? In verse 37, Mark wrote, "A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. So Mark is attributing to this storm some emotional, even human-sounding characteristics, certainly spiritual characteristics, a furious squall. So this wasn't just some waves happening. It was evident that this storm wanted to destroy the boat and everyone in it. And can you guess the main reason why? Now, a Christian friend once shared me this little gem. It's a perspective that's helpful to take. Again, it's not one to get obsessed about, but it's a good question to ask whenever this issue of opposition, this issue of malicious hate, this issue of persecution comes up. It's a helpful question to ask, and this is the perspective that this friend gave me. They said, if you were the devil, what would you be doing to stop this? So it's a pretty heavy question to ask, but it's a good one to ask to help get the right perspective on what's going on. Priscilla Shearer, a wonderful actress, also a very deep spiritual follower of Jesus with some great wisdom. She wrote a book called Fervent, and she talks about strategy that the devil uses to try and destroy Jesus, to try and destroy his followers, to try and destroy you. She speaks about strategy 1, your passion, and she says it this way: if I were your enemy, I'd seek to dim your passion, dull your interest in spiritual things, dampen your belief in God's ability and his personal concern for you, and convince you that the hope you've lost is never coming back and was probably just a lie to begin with. Strategy 2, your focus. If I were your enemy, I'd disguise myself and manipulate your perspectives so that you'd focus on the wrong culprit, your partner, your spouse, your friend, your hurt, your finances, anything or anyone except me. Because when you zero in on the most convenient, obvious places to strike back against your problems, you get the impression you're fighting for something, even though all you're really doing is just fighting for nothing. Strategy 3, your identity. If I were your enemy, I'd devalue your strength and magnify your insecurities until they dominate how you see yourself, disabling and disarming you from fighting back, from being free, from being who God has created you to be. Strategy 4, your family. If I were your enemy, I'd seek to disintegrate your family and destroy every member of it. I'd want to tear away at your trust and unity and turn everyone's love inward on themselves. Strategy 5, your past. If I were your enemy, I'd constantly remind you of your past mistakes and poor choices. I'd want to keep you burdened by shame and guilt in hopes that you'll feel incapacitated by your many failings and see no point in even trying again. Strategy 6, your fears. If I were your enemy, I'd magnify your fears, making them appear insurmountable, intimidating you with enough worries until avoiding them becomes your driving motivation. Strategy 7, your purity. If I were your enemy, I'd tempt you towards certain sins, making you believe they are basically unavoidable. I'd study your tendencies and proclivities till I learn the precise conditions that make you the most likely to indulge them. Strategy 8, your pressure. If I were your enemy, I'd make everything seem urgent, as if it's all yours to handle. Strategy 9, your hurts. If I were your enemy, I'd use every opportunity to bring old wounds to mind, as well as the people, events and circumstances that caused them. Strategy 10, your relationships. If I were your enemy, I'd work to create division between you and other Christians, between groups of Christians, anyone with the potential for uniting in battle against me and my plans. Sobering thoughts, but very helpful thoughts in helping us to get the better perspective on how to respond to the fury, to the malicious hate. Now, when the waves break over your boat, will you persevere in the face of malicious hate? N.T. Wright says this. He says, the forces of evil are roused, angry and threatening, but Jesus is so confident of God's presence and power that he can fall asleep on a pillow. Number 3, Jesus will rock your boat because you will be misunderstood. The disciples misunderstood Jesus, mistaking his carefree attitude for carelessness. Don't confuse the carefree attitude with carelessness. Verse 38, Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? So when the waves break over your boat, will you remain patient even when you are misunderstood? Jesus will also rock your boat because miracles are his trademark. This was a miracle displaying the power of Jesus. Verse 39, he got up, rebuked the wind and said to the waves, Quiet, be still. Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. David Pawson makes this comment on this miracle. He said, I am afraid I do not like the translation, peace be still. It is a lovely, comforting, calm word, but that is not how Jesus spoke. He spoke very sharply, be quiet, get down, or literally be muzzled. It is a word used to a puppy dog that jumps up at you. And he is saying, stop jumping up at my disciples, get down. Just as sometimes we have to say to our dogs when visitors come, maybe the visitor doesn't like dogs, get down, be quiet. That is how Jesus spoke to the winds. And that is the tone of voice that you get in the original language and in the modern translation. Quiet, be still. It is a very strong term. A number of years ago, I came to a real point of burnout in ministry, and I actually took stress leave. And one of the great outcomes of that was I did a spot of camping alone for 3 nights down near Jurien Bay, the lovely spot called Sandy Cape. And it was during that time I was really seeking God to show me what had just happened. Lord, please make sense of this for me. What was going on that took me to that point of burnout? And basically, as we came to the conclusion of those 3 nights camping alone, God showed me it was what went on with these disciples in the boat. The storm had come up in my life and ministry, and I felt that at the time that Jesus was just asleep on the boat and wasn't really looking out for me. And Jesus showed me that my response had been just like the disciples. Don't you care, Jesus? Don't you care that I'm going to drown here? I'm being destroyed here. And this is a very special passage, a very special story for me from the Gospel of Mark. I hope it's speaking to you today. Jesus will rock your boat because miracles are his trademark. Number 5. Jesus will rock your boat because some things will remain a mystery to us for the rest of our earthly life. The mysterious ways of God are evident in the works of Jesus. In verse 40, he said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? And he was saying the same thing, asking me the same question as I really sought him alone in prayer during that camp out. Verse 41, how did the disciples respond to his question? They were terrified and asked each other, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. There's that mystery. They were obviously getting to know Jesus, and they knew he was like no one else on earth. But this was a mystery. What they had just seen, of course, it happened, it was real, but who is this, really? Who is this right here with us? Even the wind and the waves obey him. And just to conclude, I have a little quote from Mark Sproul. He says this on this topic. In a word, what the disciples experienced on the Sea of Galilee that night was the holiness of Christ. They liked his power when they were in trouble, so they were quick to wake him when the boat seemed endangered. But when he showed them his power, they said, "This is not common power. This is holy power. This man is different from every other person on the face of the earth." And finding themselves in the presence of the Holy One of Israel, they were consumed by fear. That means that not only do people tremble at his voice, but seas that have no ears listen to his command, and winds that have no knowledge know enough to stop blowing when he says, "Be still." That is our Lord. So when the waves break over your boat, will you surrender to God's will even when you don't understand what he is doing, even when it's a mystery? You know, a good epilogue to this story is that Peter's faith grew out of this experience. Look at what happens the next time the wind rises up and threatens Peter. In Matthew 14 tells this story, when Jesus walks on the water. Matthew 14, verse 22. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Did you hear that? Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, verse 31, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" Verse 32, and when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." You know, people often criticise Peter for his failings, but let's give him credit here. He got out of that boat and he was walking on water before the fear really distracted him. But I have to say that was an extraordinary step of faith, what Peter did. And it meant he was really listening to Jesus and wanting to be that follower of Jesus that he created him to be. So I'm just going to wrap it up with some questions for you to pray about and seek God about. And if you believe God's speaking to you, we'd love to hear about that. So feel free to write comments below. When the waves break over your boat, will you still fulfill your mission? Will you persevere in the face of malicious hate? Will you remain patient even when you are misunderstood? Will you trust God for that miracle? Will you surrender to God's will even when you don't understand what he is doing when the waves break over your boat? Thanks for joining us again. God bless.